All right, so today we're going deep on climate change.
Ooh, a big one.
Yeah, no kidding.
Definitely a big one.
It is. And this time, we're looking at a report from the World Wildlife Fund,
Okay, the WWF.
the WWF, exactly.
Yeah, they do some great work.
They do, and this report, let me tell you, it's pretty intense.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It really lays out.
They've been sounding the alarm on climate change for, what, decades now?
But decades, yeah. And this one, I think, well, it really brings it all home. It's like, here's the science,
Right.
here's what's happening on the ground, and here's what's at stake. And they connect the dots between these huge global shifts and the real impacts on people, on nature.
Yeah, and what really struck me about this report, at least from what I've seen, is that it's not just about the melting glaciers
Right.
and the rising sea levels, although,
Oh, those are definitely in there.
oh yeah, they don't shy away from that.
Not at all.
But it's like they go beyond that and talk about things like mass displacement of people.
Yeah, potentially food shortages.
Exactly. Even the collapse of entire ecosystems.
And I think that's what makes it so powerful. It's like, ever wonder what an ice-free Arctic summer would look like?
I mean, it's hard to even picture that.
It's hard to even picture. Or how rising sea levels could displace 1 billion people. It's like, whoa, okay, this is serious.
Yeah, and I think what's really important to understand, and the report does a good job of this, is the difference even a fraction of a degree of warming can make.
Yeah, they really emphasize that.
Every tenth of a degree matters.
Every tenth of a degree matters, yeah.
It's not just like, oh, it's a little warmer, it's fine. Like, no, we've already hit 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels.
Right.
And the goal, as you've probably heard, is to hold it at 1.5.
Okay, so that's the magic number, 1.5 degrees.
That's the target.
So why is that the number? What happens if we hit, say, 2 degrees instead?
Well, that's where things get, well, pretty scary.
Okay, lay it on me.
At 2 degrees, we're talking about, like, virtually all coral reefs being wiped out.
All of them.
Pretty much. I mean, think about it. They protect our coastlines from erosion.
Oh, right, yeah.
They save billions in potential damage, not to mention, they support a huge amount of marine life.
So it's a domino effect.
Yeah, it's all connected.
So at 1.5 degrees, we might still lose a lot of coral.
Yeah, a significant portion, for sure.
But there's a chance for some to adapt and survive.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's not just about the numbers on a thermometer. It's about these real-world consequences that are, playing out right now.
Yeah, and the report really gets into the nitty-gritty about the difference between those two warming scenarios, like 1.5 versus 2 degrees.
Yeah.
And it can be pretty stark.
Give me an example.
Okay, so at 1.5 degrees, we might see sea levels rise by, I think it was, about 1.5 feet by 2100.
Okay, that's still a lot.
It is, but at 2 degrees, it's closer to 1.8 feet.
So a few inches.
And you might think, a few inches, what's the big deal?
Right.
But those few inches could be the difference between a community surviving or being completely submerged.
Wow, yeah, those few inches make a huge difference.
They really do.
And it's not just about the coastlines, right?
Nope.
The report talks about extreme heat waves becoming way more frequent.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're projecting that at 2 degrees, an additional, 1.7 billion people
Wow.
could be exposed to extreme heat waves every 5 years.
That's a lot of people.
It's a massive public health crisis waiting to happen.
Yeah, I mean, think about the strain on hospitals.
Exactly.
Infrastructure.
Uh-huh.
Just daily life in general.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine trying to live in that kind of heat all the time?
It's hard to even fathom.
And the thing is, it's all connected, right?
Right.
Warmer temperatures melt ice.
Leading to...
Higher sea levels, which displace communities, push people inland.
And then you have these intense heat waves hitting those same populations.
Exactly.
It's a recipe for disaster.
And it doesn't stop there. The report also highlights how a warmer world means more floods, more droughts, and a significant loss of habitat for wildlife.
And we're talking about losing entire species.
Yeah, we are. And it's not just the exotic ones.
Right.
It's even creatures we see every day, like insects.
Yeah.
They're at risk.
Sometimes when I hear about this stuff, it feels so big and overwhelming,
Yeah, I get that.
It's like, what can one person really do to make a difference?
It's a common feeling.
Yeah, but the report does offer some hope in that department.
It does. It
It
does.
talks about the Paris Agreement.
Right, which is
This global commitment
Yeah.
to tackling climate change.
Right. It's not perfect, but it's a framework at least.
Okay, so faced with all these challenges, what's being done globally? This is where the Paris Agreement comes in, right?
Yeah, the Paris Agreement.
I remember hearing about it, but honestly, I couldn't tell you much about what it actually does.
Well, the main goal is to keep global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius, ideally limiting it to 1.5.
Right.
It's about getting countries to set targets for reducing their greenhouse gas emissions.
Mm.
But it also, recognizes the need to help countries adapt to the impacts that are already unavoidable.
That makes sense. So it's not just about cutting emissions.
Nope.
It's also about helping communities prepare for the changes that are already, baked in.
Exactly. And one of the key points the WWF emphasizes is that this isn't just about governments. It's about businesses, communities, individuals all stepping up and playing their part.
So let's talk about the individual piece of this puzzle.
Okay.
What can we, as regular people, actually do to make a difference?
Well, the report focuses on 3 key areas where our choices have a big impact.
Okay.
Our homes and buildings, how we get around, and what we eat.
Those seem like pretty straightforward categories.
Yeah, they are.
And I can see how those connect to the bigger picture. But what are some concrete examples of actions people can take?
Okay, so in terms of buildings, one of the biggest things is transitioning to clean energy.
Okay.
Think solar panels, energy-efficient appliances, and making sure our homes are well insulated.
I've heard a lot about heat pumps lately. Are those a good option?
They can be. They're much more efficient than traditional heating and cooling systems.
Right.
And they can run on electricity, which means you can power them with renewable sources.
So even if you can't afford a full solar panel setup,
Right.
switching to more efficient appliances and heating systems is a good step in the right direction.
Definitely.
Okay, what about transportation? What are some ways people can make a difference there?
Well, the obvious ones are walking, biking, taking public transit whenever possible. Right. But even if you need a car, there are choices you can make.
Like driving a more fuel-efficient car, or even better, an electric vehicle.
Exactly. And as electric vehicles become more mainstream,
Yeah.
the technology's getting better, the prices are coming down.
Right.
It's a win-win for the planet and your wallet.
I can see how those changes in buildings and transportation could add up to a big impact.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about the food piece.
Okay.
What role does our diet play in all of this?
It's actually a huge factor.
Really?
Yeah, the report highlights the importance of reducing food waste
Oh,
and shifting towards more plant-based diets.
so composting those scraps instead of tossing them in the trash,
Yeah.
and maybe trying out meatless Mondays.
Exactly. And supporting local farmers
Yeah.
by buying locally grown produce.
Okay.
That's another great way to reduce the emissions associated with transporting food long distances.
Okay, so we've got clean energy, sustainable transportation, and mindful eating.
Mm-hmm.
Those are some pretty tangible actions people can take, but I have to admit, sometimes it's hard to see how those individual choices can really make a dent in this global crisis.
Yeah, I get that. It can feel overwhelming.
It does.
But think about it this way. If millions of people are making these changes,
Yeah.
it creates a ripple effect. It sends a signal to businesses and policymakers that people care about this issue and are willing to make changes in their own lives.
So it's not just about the direct impact of our actions.
Right.
It's also about the message it sends
Uh-huh.
and the momentum it builds.
Exactly.
That's actually pretty encouraging.
It is. And remember, the report also emphasizes that actions taken in the United States
Right.
are especially important because of how much we emit per person.
Oh, right. I read that the average American emits something like 20 tons of greenhouse gases each year.
It's a lot.
That's crazy high compared to a lot of other countries.
It is.
Wow.
So every step we take here in the U.S. to reduce our footprint has a ripple effect that's felt around the world.
That's a powerful thought.
Yeah.
It makes me feel like I have a responsibility to do my part, not just for myself,
Mm-hmm.
but for the global community.
It's a global issue.
It is. We've covered a lot of ground in this first segment.
We have.
We've gone from the big picture of climate change to the very personal choices we can make in our daily lives.
And in the next segment, we'll delve deeper into how these individual actions connect to the larger systems that need to change.
Okay, sounds good.
We'll talk about policy solutions, technological innovations, and the power of collective action.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about the Paris Agreement
Yeah, the Paris Agreement.
and how it's trying to get the whole world on board with tackling climate change.
Right.
But it's not just about setting these big global targets.
No, not at all.
It has to translate into actual changes on the ground.
Exactly. And that's one of the, I think, most interesting things about the Paris Agreement.
Oh, yeah.
It encourages countries to develop their own plans for how they're going to reduce their emissions.
Well, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Not at all.
Different countries can take different approaches based on their specific circumstances?
Exactly.
Okay, so what are some examples of the types of actions countries are taking?
Well, a lot of countries are, investing heavily in renewable energy sources, like solar and wind power.
Makes sense.
Others are focusing on improving energy efficiency in buildings and industries,
Yeah.
things like that.
I've also heard about carbon pricing mechanisms,
Yeah,
where companies basically have to pay for the carbon pollution they produce.
right.
Is that part of the Paris Agreement, too?
It's not explicitly mandated,
Okay.
but the agreement definitely encourages countries to explore different ways to put a price on carbon.
I mean, the idea is that if it costs money to pollute,
Yeah,
companies will be more motivated to find cleaner ways of doing business.
exactly. It creates a financial incentive.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty smart approach.
It is.
It makes pollution a financial liability instead of just an environmental one.
Right.
Are there any specific examples of countries or regions that are really leading the way on climate action?
Definitely. I mean, the European Union has been a front runner for a while now.
Okay.
They've implemented a whole range of policies, including carbon pricing, renewable energy targets, and regulations to promote energy efficiency.
Okay, and what about here in the U.S.?
Are we doing our part?
Are we doing our part?
Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Okay.
We've seen progress at the state and local levels,
Okay.
with many cities and states setting their own ambitious climate goals.
Yeah.
But on the national level, it's been, more challenging.
Right.
The political landscape has made it difficult to implement comprehensive climate policies.
Yeah. It can be discouraging to see how political this issue has become.
It's definitely become politicized.
Yeah.
But the report does highlight some positive developments here in the U.S.
Oh, okay, good.
For example, the Inflation Reduction Act includes a lot of investments in clean energy and climate resilience.
Oh, right. That was a big deal.
It was huge, yeah.
So it provides tax credits for things like solar panels, electric vehicles, and energy-efficient home improvements.
Mm-hmm.
And it also invests in things like clean energy research and development.
Exactly.
So even though we're facing some political roadblocks, there is still progress being made. It's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all.
And remember, it's not just about government action.
Right.
Businesses are also playing an increasingly important role in addressing climate change.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, yeah. I've heard a lot about companies setting sustainability goals and trying to reduce their carbon footprints.
Right.
Is that just a PR move, or are they actually making a difference?
Well, some of it might be greenwashing.
Yeah.
But I think many companies are genuinely committed to sustainability.
Oh.
They're realizing that it's not just good for the planet, it's also good for their bottom line.
Okay, how so?
Well, for one thing, consumers are increasingly demanding sustainable products and services.
Right.
They're willing to pay more for things that are environmentally friendly.
That makes sense. I know I'm definitely more likely to buy from a company that I know is taking steps to be sustainable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And investors are also paying more attention to environmental, social, and governance factors. When they're making investment decisions, they're realizing that companies that are sustainable are likely to be more resilient in the long run.
Right.
So it's not just about doing the right thing, it's also about being a smart and forward-thinking business.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
And as more companies embrace sustainability, it creates a ripple effect throughout the economy.
Okay.
It drives innovation, creates new jobs, and helps to accelerate the transition to a cleaner, more sustainable future.
We've talked about the Paris Agreement, government policies, and the role of businesses. But what about the power of communities?
Communities.
Yeah.
Oh, they're huge. They're absolutely key.
Really?
Yeah, I think communities are key to driving meaningful change.
Okay.
They're often the ones on the front lines of climate impacts.
Right.
So they have a strong incentive to act.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I've seen so many examples of communities coming together
Okay.
to install solar panels, create community gardens, advocate for better public transportation.
Yeah. Those are great examples.
And when communities come together to take action, it not only has a direct impact on their local environment, but it also creates a sense of empowerment and collective purpose.
Right. It's like they're taking their future into their own hands.
Exactly.
Instead of waiting for someone else to solve the problem.
And that's really important.
Right.
Because addressing climate change isn't just about reducing emissions. It's also about building resilience and creating a more just an equitable world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about global agreements,
We have.
government policies, business actions, and community initiatives. It's clear that this is a complex issue
Oh, for sure.
with no easy solutions.
No silver bullet.
But it's also clear that there's a lot of action happening
Yeah,
and that there are people all over the world working hard to address this challenge.
absolutely. And that's what's important to remember, that
Yeah.
we're all in this together.
We ought to.
We need to work collaboratively across borders,
Yeah.
sectors, and communities to create a future where both people and nature can thrive.
It's like a giant puzzle.
Yeah,
And we all have a piece to contribute.
we do,
And even though it can feel daunting at times,
for sure.
it's also incredibly inspiring to see so many people stepping up and taking action.
I agree, and that's what gives me hope.
Yeah.
We have the knowledge, we have the technology, and we have the resources to address this crisis.
You do.
What we need now is the collective will to act.
Okay, so we've explored the global landscape,
Mhm.
the role of governments and businesses,
Mhm.
and the power of communities.
Right.
But let's bring it back to the individual level.
Okay.
We talked earlier about some of the choices we can make in our daily lives
Right.
to reduce our carbon footprint. But what about the mental and emotional side of this?
Mhm.
How do we stay motivated and hopeful in the face of such a daunting challenge?
That's a great question, and it's a question I hear a lot.
I bet.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed,
Hmm.
anxious, even hopeless sometimes. And it's important to acknowledge those feelings,
Okay.
but the key is to remember that you're not alone.
Right.
Millions of people around the world are feeling the same way.
Millions.
Yeah.
So what can we do to manage those feelings and stay engaged without getting burned out?
Well, one thing is to focus on what you can control.
Okay.
You can't solve the entire climate crisis single-handedly,
Right.
but you can make changes in your own life
Yeah.
that align with your values.
It's about finding that balance between taking action
Mm-hmm.
and taking care of your own mental health.
Exactly, because if you're constantly bombarded with doom and gloom,
Yeah.
it's hard to stay motivated.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's also important to connect with others who share your concerns.
Okay.
Join a local environmental group,
Mhm.
volunteer for a cause you care about, or just talk to your friends and family about these issues.
Yeah.
When you feel connected to a community, it's easier to stay hopeful and engaged.
It's funny. We started this conversation by talking about the very real threats posed by climate change. But now we're talking about hope,
Yeah.
community,
Yeah.
and individual empowerment.
That's the beauty of this issue,
Yeah.
It's complex and challenging.
It is.
But it also forces us to confront some fundamental questions
Okay.
about who we are, what we value, and what kind of future we want to create.
And as we wrap up this segment,
Okay.
I want to leave our listeners with a thought.
All right.
We've talked about a lot of big ideas,
We have.
but at the end of the day, it comes down to each of us making choices.
Mm-hmm.
Every decision we make,
Yeah.
every action we take
Right.
has an impact.
It does.
So it's about asking ourselves, what can I do today to be a part of this solution?
That's a great question to ask yourself. And as we move into our final segment,
Okay.
we'll explore the concept of climate justice
All right.
and how we can ensure that the solutions we create are equitable and benefit everyone, not just a privileged few.
Okay. Looking forward to it.
Stay tuned.
All right. So welcome back for the final part of our deep dive
Yeah.
into climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about a lot,
We have.
from the science, the impacts,
Right.
the global agreements, the role of businesses, communities, individuals,
All of it.
and even, how to manage those eco-anxiety feelings.
Definitely an important part of the conversation.
It is. But there's one more crucial piece we need to address.
Okay.
Climate justice.
Yes, climate justice.
I've heard that term thrown around a lot.
It's a big one.
It is, but I'm not sure I fully understand what it means.
Okay, sure.
Can you break it down for me?
Yeah, so climate justice, at its core, recognizes that the people and communities who have contributed the least to the problem of climate change
Right.
are often the ones who are hit the hardest by its effects.
So it's about fairness.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that the burden of this crisis shouldn't fall on the shoulders of those who are least responsible for creating it.
Absolutely.
So, give me an example.
Okay, so think about coastal communities in developing countries.
Okay.
They might be facing rising sea levels, more intense storms,
Right.
but they haven't benefited from the same level of industrialization and economic growth
Right.
that has fueled emissions in wealthier nations.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the science and the policy debates.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't forget about the human side of this crisis.
The human side, exactly.
So climate justice goes beyond just recognizing the unequal impacts.
It does.
It's also about ensuring that the solutions we create
Yeah.
are equitable and benefit everyone,
Right.
not just a privileged few.
Not just a privileged few.
Okay, so what would that look like in practice?
Well, for starters, it means involving communities that are most impacted
Okay,
in the decision-making process.
makes sense.
They need to have a seat at the table when we're talking about climate policies and solutions.
Right, they're the ones who are living with the consequences.
Ex-
So their voices need to be heard.
Absolutely.
What else can be done to ensure climate justice?
It also means ensuring that the transition to a clean energy economy is just and inclusive.
Okay.
We can't just shut down fossil fuel industries
Right.
without providing alternative job opportunities for the workers and communities that depend on them.
Right, otherwise you're just shifting the burden from one group to another.
Exactly.
It has to be a just transition.
A just transition.
And we need to make sure that the benefits of climate action are shared equitably.
Yes, definitely.
So like investments in renewable energy should create jobs and economic opportunities in communities that have been historically marginalized or disadvantaged.
Absolutely. It's about creating a more level playing field.
So it's not just about reducing emissions.
Nope.
It's about using this moment as an opportunity to create a more just and equitable world.
I like that. It's about opportunity.
Okay, so we've explored this concept of climate justice.
Mm.
We've talked about the science, the impacts, the solutions, the role of governments, businesses, communities, and individuals.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot to take in. What are some key takeaways you hope our listeners will walk away with from this deep dive?
You know, I think the most important thing is to remember that we have agency.
Okay.
We're not powerless in the face of this crisis.
Right.
We can make choices in our daily lives that make a difference.
Yeah, and one thing that really struck me from this WWF report is how much emphasis they put on the interconnectedness of everything.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about climate change in isolation.
Right.
It's about how it's linked to poverty, inequality, biodiversity loss, so many other issues.
It's all connected.
All connected, yeah.
Climate change is a symptom of a deeper systemic problem.
Okay.
Our unsustainable relationship with the planet.
So the solutions need to address those root causes,
Yes.
not just the symptoms.
Exactly.
So it's not just about reducing emissions. It's about transforming our systems and our way of thinking.
It's a big shift.
It is. It's about building a more sustainable and just world for everyone.
And it's possible.
It is possible, yeah.
It's not going to be easy.
No,
It's going to require collaboration, innovation, and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
it will, but I believe we're up to the task.
I think so, too. And there's a growing movement of people around the world who are demanding change.
Yeah, and that gives me hope.
Me too.
We started this deep dive by painting a pretty stark picture of the potential consequences of climate change.
Yeah.
And we didn't shy away from the
No,
challenges.
I didn't.
But we also explored the incredible resilience of nature, the ingenuity of humankind, and the power of collective action.
And that's what I want to leave our listeners with, a
Yeah.
sense of hope and possibility.
Mm.
Yes, the situation is urgent,
It is.
but it's not hopeless.
It's not hopeless.
We have the tools and the knowledge to create a better future.
We do.
It's up to each of us to choose what role we'll play in that story.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the climate crisis. We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Inspiring, yeah.
Remember, every action counts.
Every action counts.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.